In 1881, the Vatican made an announcement that seemed historic. For the first time, select scholars would be allowed limited access to its most restricted archives. The decision was framed as transparency. But almost immediately, something unexpected emerged. Among ordinary correspondence and church decrees were files labeled restricted, non-publicandum, and dangerous. Some were described as historically accurate, yet unsuitable for public knowledge. That distinction alone raises a troubling question. What kind of truth is considered too dangerous to release? The Vatican is more than a religious center. It is one of the longest surviving institutions in human history, and one of the most meticulous record keepers the world has ever known. For nearly 2,000 years, it has preserved documents through wars, collapses, and revolutions. Survival on that scale requires more than belief. It requires continuity, control, and above all, narrative stability. Throughout history, institutions have learned a difficult lesson. Belief can be guided, but information cannot. Within the Vatican, records were not classified solely by truth or falsehood. They were classified by impact, by whether their contents could disrupt doctrine, authority, or social order. One early scholar granted partial access to the archives was Father Louis Duchesne, a respected Catholic historian known for questioning inconsistencies in early Christian chronology. Before entering the archives, Duchesne spoke openly about unresolved gaps in church history. After months of review, his published work changed. Certain arguments disappeared. Public challenges softened. Questions once raised were never revisited. Officially, Duchesne described this as reinterpretation. Privately, surviving correspondence suggests concerns about pushing inquiry beyond acceptable boundaries. Similar cases appear throughout history. Scholars who revise conclusions. Research projects that quietly end. Findings reframed rather than debated. Not because the material was proven false, but because it refused to fit cleanly into established frameworks. Most sealed documents reportedly concern ordinary matters. Political conflicts, internal disagreements, failed predictions, but a smaller group continues to attract attention. These records reference advanced knowledge appearing far earlier than expected, astronomical observations inconsistent with known instruments, geographical data predating official exploration, and chronologies that strain conventional timelines. One long-standing rumor involves maps, cataloged within Vatican records, allegedly depicting coastlines of Africa and South America with surprising accuracy centuries before their recognized discovery. The maps themselves have never been displayed. Only vague catalog descriptions remain. Their current location is unknown. Evidence of suppression does not appear only in Rome. In letters preserved from early medieval monasteries, monks debated whether certain texts should be copied at all. The concern was not theological error, but interpretation. One letter warns that a particular manuscript invites conclusions that unsettle the order of creation itself. Shortly after, references to that text vanish from monastic inventories. In an era when knowledge survived only if it was copied, omission was enough to erase it. In modern times, the pattern appears unchanged. Researchers granted rare access to restricted collections have occasionally withdrawn findings without explanation. Funding disappears. Permissions are revoked. Public statements soften earlier claims. The Vatican openly acknowledges that entire archive sections remain sealed today. When questioned, the explanation is consistent. Preservation. But preservation from what? Some researchers suggest that certain records challenge not religion, but anthropology, humanity's understanding of its own origins. Ancient accounts describe encounters later framed as divine or angelic. Public theology treats them symbolically. Private records, however, sometimes describe physical interactions, measured effects, and uncertainty about classification. This has led to one of the more controversial theories. What if myth was not created to explain the unknown, but to contain it? Across cultures, similar patterns emerge. Sumerian tablets speak of knowledge bestowed suddenly. Egyptian traditions describe gods as bringers of order and science. Mesoamerican myths recount teachers arriving from the sky. different civilizations. Same motif. Knowledge arrives too early. Society adapts. The story becomes symbolic. Whether these accounts describe literal events or psychological frameworks remains unresolved. But the consistency is difficult to ignore. One theory rarely discussed outside academic circles draws from a collection of texts often labeled apocryphal or symbolic, the accounts of the Watchers. In these writings, celestial beings are not portrayed as distant messengers, but as observers assigned to humanity, entities that descended, interacted, and allegedly interfered. Public theology treats these stories as allegory. Yet private correspondence preserved in early church archives suggests unease with how literal some descriptions appeared. The Watchers are described not as spiritual abstractions, but as physical beings who taught forbidden knowledge, astronomy, metallurgy, and advanced calculation. The concern was not their existence, but the consequence of what they shared. Knowledge, once given, could not be taken back. Early church authorities reportedly debated whether these accounts should be preserved at all. The compromise was containment. The stories were not destroyed, but reframed as myth, symbolism, and moral warning. Their literal interpretations were quietly discouraged. Some researchers believe related Vatican documents expand on these accounts, detailing debates over whether early human advancement followed a natural trajectory, or whether it was accelerated by external influence. No such documents have ever been publicly confirmed, but references to them persist in catalog titles, marginal notes, and correspondence that stops just short of explanation. If true, the implication would not challenge faith, but history itself. And history, once destabilized, cannot be easily repaired. Over time, myth becomes a stabilizer. Literal accounts soften into allegory. Uncomfortable details dissolve into metaphor. Myth does not erase truth. It makes it survivable. For institutions that endure centuries, collapse rarely comes from invasion. It comes from contradiction, from stories that no longer align. And so silence becomes policy, not out of malice, but survival. If the sealed records were merely embarrassing, time would have drained their significance. If they were false, exposure would have disarmed them. The persistence of secrecy suggests something else entirely. Perhaps these records were not hidden because humanity wasn't ready to hear them. Perhaps they remain hidden because the questions they raise about history, authority, and human origins still have no safe answers. And until those answers exist, some doors may remain closed. Not to keep us out, but to keep something unresolved. Welcome to the Mystery Room.